If John was beaten up and attacked in that house, who did it?
Just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know.
Okay, you're aware he was beaten up by Brian and Colin Albert. I mean, we're all in on the same joke, right? My taillight was cracked and John was pulverized.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. And it's not for us to know. Somebody other than Karen is responsible for that, for the killing of John.
It was a lonely cry in the cold hard light. Guitar soars through the stormy skies. A melody that pierces the eyes. Love's a memory, a distant dream. In this world it seems. Fingers glide in the fading light. A final note, a last good night. Lost in the shadows, lost in time. Dreams are all we find. Oh, dreams whisper, oh, dreams sigh. In the darkness they take flight. Heartbreak echoes, a lonely cry in the cold hard light. In the shadows where whispers dwell,
1.3.
like guitar sings of love's farewell.
10-4, I just wanted to know if
Echoes of the heart once bold, now lost in the night's cold fold.
Yeah, I'll be 23 back on that
Secrets hidden
property
deep
kid. I'll be 76
within,
of those flamethrower that.
tales of love that couldn't win. Promises made in moonlight's glow, now broken like a shattered show. Sorrow in the guitar's cry, resilience in the sky. Through the night we'll find our way, carrying secrets, holding on today. Memories of laughter and tears, in the silence they appear, whispers of a time so true, when love was all we knew. Lost in the echoes of the past, wishing for what we had. In the dark we search for light, holding on to what we fight. Through the pain, through the night, we find strength in the fight. Sorrow in the guitar's cry, resilience in the sky. Through the night we'll find our way, carrying secrets, holding on today. Holding on to give.
521. Serve me a card for a parking problem.
Okay, we're back. Whole new show. Let's see how many people make the jump with us. Oh, we got better numbers on the YouTube channel anyway. So thank you. Those are 8 o'clock's a good time for people. All right, guys, thank you for being here. So this is probably, this is very likely to be my last show that deals with the subject matter of Karen Read, unless things develop where the witnesses want to join me in the fight. I don't want to mean that as a criticism, because I don't have to walk in their shoes. None of us have had to walk in their shoes. And there's a lot of complicated things going on. Some of them have difficulty getting the right to speak because of the Netflix documentary. And there are other complications, such as involving other legal issues, and including the Turtle Boy prosecution, things that I can't go into very deeply. But there are also some of them that have the idea, the hope, that this whole thing will die down, and their children and their families and they can live normal lives with the trial over. Now, I didn't believe that would happen, and I don't believe that will happen. But it's not for me to make the decision; it's for them. I believed that they would continue to try to make all the people that have been making money and popularity on this. We're not going to stop. You're not going to see Turtle Boy or Melanie or Young Jerks, all these cowardly people that don't have any interest in the truth. You're not going to see them stop trying to get more out of this, right? Of course not. They're going to continue to grift on it. That's just what they do. Why would they stop if they're still getting stuff out of it? And then, but we're also seeing her lawyers too, because they have a lot to gain too. These guys, Alan Jackson wants to be this generation's Johnny Cochran, right? And so he wants to be known as that. He wants to be the Hollywood lawyer that miraculously gets guilty people off. That's what Johnny Cochran did with OJ, right? F. Lee Bailey. Everybody's entitled to a fair trial, and the police have to run a fair investigation, and the prosecution has to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are all things that have to be overcome to get a guilty verdict. And sometimes really, really good lawyers can make a big difference in making that harder. And that's what Alan Jackson wants to be known for. And it looks like good chance he will be. So you're going to see them continue to make a lot of noise on social media. For instance, when the Netflix documentary comes out, which isn't going to be for 6 months, and it's not going to be pro-Karen, but they're going to be combating it. And then at some point, you'll see other documentaries and a pro-Karen Read movie come out year from now, 2 years from now, I don't know. And there's other things in the works. I had somebody call me this week that's doing a dramatization series for it. So this is not going to die anytime soon. And so I don't, it's an understandable hope by the innocent witnesses, and they are innocent, to stop the madness. But it's not going to. So for me, I think that the only way to fight back is to fight back, and you have to fight back with the truth. I'm here to help for that. But if the decision is made collectively or individually that that's not what they want to do, then I will respect that decision. And I really have nothing more I can do on this case. I've done a lot on it, and I'm ready to move on. I don't want to just find myself doing shows to keep repeating myself. And I don't want to, which I will be doing some of that tonight. And I don't want to find myself in a position of having to watch Turtle Boy shows or Glare shows or Melanie Little's shows just to get something to talk about. I don't want to do that. You see, with the Brian Kohlberger case, I only did 2 videos on it because then they arrested Brian Kohlberger. I've always been more interested. The only thing that I like about true crime is I like the puzzle of solving an unsolved case. And once it's solved, I lose interest in it. And I think a lot of people in the public are like that. So that's what we're going to do. Now, tonight's job is naively, perhaps, or certainly it's lottery ticket long shot. I'm addressing, if any of the jurors dare to watch this, and I'm addressing you politely, respectfully, even thankfully that what you sacrificed to do your job. All right, please. I can't turn this phone off. So if anybody's watching, please let's try to stop with the messages on. If you want to reach me, message me after the show or email me. I will check emails. So if people give me clips, I will go and send that periodically. I don't know. I love that the volume on this new phone is so loud, but it's hard to do live shows. All right. So I'm addressing you, the jurors, if you turn this on here, respectfully. It's just not going to stop. I'm sorry, guys. I tried to fix things by getting a new phone, and I can't seem to escape problems. So if you're texting me and you're watching live, please hold off on the text until after the show if you could. I still love you. Just hold off. Because it is an interruption. All right. So I want to address the jurors. I'm addressing you jurors out there, whether you're going to watch this live now or you're going to pick this up and watch it live later. I want to have a civilized conversation with you. And I'm always open to have that conversation with you privately, on the phone, during emails, whatever. But I'm going to have it now with you as though you're here. Now, you got it wrong, but it's understandable why. You had a very difficult job to do. This was a difficult case. So first of all, let's start with recognizing the fact there are no witnesses, there's no video, something that takes place at night, and you're just looking at the evidence. And John's injuries are kind of weird for getting hit by a vehicle because he's only clipped and he only has minor injuries to his arm, mostly. And those injuries weren't explained very well in either trial. And the fatal wound was the head wound that was caused by hitting the frozen ground. Now, I could see if that might not be convincing beyond a reasonable doubt to you. I get that. The other problem is that you had, 7 weeks to absorb this information. That's a lot of information to absorb in 7 weeks. Lot. And because this became a high-profile case, you got a lot of strange witnesses, both experts and otherwise, and we'll go over them, that come out of the woodwork. Because in a big case, it draws through people that everybody wants to play their big part in the case. They want their 15 minutes of fame. It's a nature of the beast. I found this was a big problem when I was studying the Lizzie Borden case. All kinds of false confessors come forward or witnesses that say things that could not have been true. And so police have to have the difficult job of having to sort this out. And then you as jurors have a difficult time to have the process of sorting some of it out too. So it's very, very difficult. This was a hard case. And if you told the truth to the judge that you hadn't been studying this case over the last 2 years, that means you had 7 weeks to absorb all the information that both sides presented to you. And that's hard. Now, I'm going to focus some of that information here for you. I'm not going to bring up displays to show it, but it'll jive with what you heard at the trial. And there are other ways to go back and look this up. For people that have been watching my channel a long time, they'll have heard a lot of this before, so they'll have to bear with us. But the first and most simple thing on this case that shows that you got it wrong was the time, and I have to be careful how I say this now because there has been a verdict now. So I'm going to always be careful how I say it. So let's address the timeline for planting the taillight piece that the state police found at 5:45 p.m. That's the CERT team. So Lieutenant O'Hara, who was the head of the 7-man CERT team, testified that they found that piece 3 feet down in the snow at ground level. All right? So if that taillight piece was planted, somebody had to get it down to ground level. All right? So let's look at the timeline. Now, the first thing We can look. So this case really becomes an either or. So you have Karen's taillight was reassembled, and it matches perfectly to the taillight, to the piece. The piece that was reassembled matches perfectly from what's missing from her car. Perfectly. So that's the piece. So either she did it, or the taillight was, that piece was planted. Those pieces were planted. There's no middle ground. It's not like somebody else was driving up the street and struck John O'Keefe. So either her vehicle struck John O'Keefe, or those or those pieces were planted. And let's just focus on that one piece from 545. Okay. Now, in order for that piece to be planted, somebody had to have access to the vehicle in order to pry that piece off, and then they had to have access to the crime scene where they could bury it at street level. All right, so let's start with the access to it. Now, the Lexus, after Karen left from dropping off John at 34 Fairview, she goes home to John's house. She parks inside the garage. Now, nobody on either side has ever suggested that car was tampered with inside the garage. There's no evidence that anybody broke. There was no evidence. Police had examined the garage for damage, and they didn't find anything. And again, nobody on either side has suggested. Now, it's inside the garage until 5:08. At 5:08, Karen backs out. And you saw that video in court. We've all seen it. And she backs lightly into John's car. And apparently, both sides have agreed that she backed into it at under 1 mile an hour. She barely nudged it. Really wasn't hard enough to do much or any damage. Certainly wasn't hard enough to knock pieces off. And you can look in the lightly fallen, the freshly fallen snow in the driveway there. That's pretty well lit up. If anything had fallen off at that moment, any piece of taillight into that snow, it would have broken that snow, and it'd be very visible. There's no sign of that. So it's pretty clear that nothing broke out off that piece and fell into the snow there. Then she goes out searching for John. We don't know where. Then she goes to the McCabe house, and she's hysterical there. And she's already screaming about her taillight, as are both of McCabe's witnesses. Maybe you don't believe their testimony. Okay. Because she's drunk and hysterical, now Kerry Roberts, she had been called, and Kerry Roberts meets them there. So they decide to go back to John's house first to make sure John wasn't in the house, and he came home and they just didn't know, because John's at home. I mean, Karen, also besides Karen in the house was John's niece. So they go back. So they drive back first to John's house to check that out. But Karen doesn't drive because she's hysterical and drunk. So Jen drives. And you can see the video when they pull in. When they pull in, they go into the house. Now, so the Lexus is parked at the front left of the driveway, as you've all seen. And that's where it sits all morning until about 12:30, 1 o'clock, when Karen has arrived. Well, Karen arrives with her dad and her brother and her brother's wife pull up in another car. I think they arrive around 12 or 12:30. They stay at John's house for about a half hour. Karen gathers some things, and then they leave. And then Karen's dad drives Karen all the way back to Dighton. So the car doesn't move, but it's between the time Jen dropped it off there with Karen inside it until about 1 o'clock, when the father drives it to Dighton. So for both trips, Karen's in the car. Okay. Then so it's under surveillance video at John's house the whole time. Then it goes to Dighton, and then it's under video surveillance again, home, some kind of a DoorDash video, doorbell video. And now the snow is still coming down, and that car gets buried in snow. And that video was made from that doorbell was made available to both the prosecution and the defense, and you got to see it in court. So what you need to know, and then the troopers arrive around 3:30, and they tow it at 4:18. So from the time that Jen McCabe parked that car there, it didn't move until 1, and then it goes to the driveway, and it's under a different surveillance video, and it doesn't move until 4:18. So all through that time, all through that day, either it was under video surveillance or Karen was in the Lexus itself. So it seems pretty unlikely. I'd say 99.9% likely, if you want to use one of the jurors likes that number, that nobody tampered with it at that time. Okay, so then it's towed to Canton, where it arrives at the Sally Port. Now, what you need to understand is the CERT team, as they testified, as Lieutenant O'Hara testified, started arriving just before 5 p.m. They were waiting on a 7-man crew to show up. The Lexus arrived, driven by a tow truck driver who's not a trooper, arrived at 5:31. Now, they have to wait to get permission to open the Sally Port because it's also a prisoner exchange dock for the Canton police. So there's a rules and regulations about opening it. It has to be ordered from a superior officer. So it's finally ordered to be open, and the tow truck driver drives it in at 5:36. Now, what's going on at the crime scene at this time? Well, according to Lieutenant O'Hara, they started shoveling at 5:20. And the seventh man person of that CERT team didn't arrive until I think it was 5:38. And so that's when they really start shoveling in earnest in an area that they had marked off. They had set up some lights, and they also had arranged the cruises. They had lights, they had helmet lights, and they had arranged their cruises to shine light on the crime scene. And the area that they decided to shovel out was a small, tiny area. It was the size of 2 parking spaces. You can see it in the video, very small. So once they started digging in earnest at 5:38, they finally found that corner piece 3 feet down in the snow at 5:45. So there was really no time for anybody to get from the Sally Port with that piece that allegedly would have got broken off. So again, the tow truck driver, he's not part of the conspiracy, right? The tow truck driver drives the vehicle in at 5:36. The Sally Port door closes at 5:41. It's a 5-minute drive from the Sally Port to the crime scene. It's still an active blizzard situation outside too, so it might even normally take a little longer. There was no time for anybody from that Sally Port to get there and walk out amidst those 7 troopers that are digging shoulder to shoulder and bury that piece 3 feet down at the snow, getting to street level. There's no time. So if you look at this case as an either or, that's it. It's pretty much game over. All right. Now, it's the defense's job. It's any defense's job to create the issue of odd things. They got to find odd things, or they got to take things that they can create into odd things. Now, the overwhelming majority of the things that Alan Jackson and Turtle Boy have presented to people over the last couple of years, presented as odd things, are not odd things. They're things that have very mundane explanations. And I'll give you an example that I don't think you heard in this trial because Higgins didn't testify. But one of the things that they always have talked about is odd things. And now that you're following this case outside of the trial, you might run into this, is why did Brian Higgins destroy his phone on a military base? Well, yes, he did. If you want to use those words are inflammatory. What he did was he lives on Cape Cod, and anybody who knows about Cape Cod knows that those towns there's no trash pickup in those towns. So either you hire a private company to pick up your trash, or you have to bring your trash to what they call a recycle center, and you pay to drop off your bags. So it's not free. You have to pay. Now, if you're in the military, you have a special privilege where you can go on the military base. I forget the name of the base, but you can drive onto it as you're leaving the Cape. You can get discounted gas, discounted goods. It's a privilege for being in the military. Now, Brian Higgins was not only in the military, but he served in combat in Iraq. So he is fully qualified to take advantage of that privilege. He lives by himself at the time, no girlfriend, no wife, no kids, no pets, doesn't generate a lot of trash. So not surprisingly, when he has to take his trash to the military base, when he gets rid of his phone, he throws the phone out in a trash bag, and that he testified that trash bag he threw out on the base. I don't know whether it was a can or a dumpster. I think he was a little uncomfortable talking about it because he maybe felt like he was abusing a privilege. I don't know. So he was a little uncomfortable. But whether he threw it in a dumpster or just threw it in a trash barrel that was there, that's where he got rid of it. He didn't go and take his phone out onto the military base and destroy it with a sledgehammer. No. He just threw it out in a bag. But the defense tries to say, oh, he destroyed his phone. It makes it look all nefarious. And then he went to a military base. No, he goes in that military base every time he drives off the Cape. Get cheap gas, cheap liquor, whatever you want to get. It's a privilege. And it's on the way off the base. It's on the way off the Cape. So that's all that happened. It's just Alan Jackson in September, leading up to that first trial, when he was looking, they tested the hair that was found, that you probably heard about, that was found on the rear panel. And when they tested it, it came back initially. The testing is destructive, so they have to take off a little piece of it. And they took the smallest piece they could. And what they initially found was there was not enough hair to match to human DNA. And so Alan Jackson took that and said, it's a non-human hair. And before he took that, he fed that to Turtle Boy. And Turtle Boy said that on his show, it's a non-human hair. In other words, implying that it was an artificial hair off a coat or something like that, or a hat, right? No. And later on, the testing proved that hair matched to John. But they were willing to call it a non-human hair. And I know people that were free Karen Reed that actually turned at that moment because they looked at what it actually was, and they realized that Alan Jackson was blowing smoke up their ass, which means Turtle Boy was. And these people aren't interested in the truth. Before that, Alan Jackson had made a big spectacle at a hearing talking about a gap in the library video. There was no gap. This is the modern world. And in the modern world, camera systems for cities and large groups like that are motion triggered. So there was no gap. It's just nobody drove by. And there was 3 different ways Karen could have went home. There's no indication. We'll never know what way she went home. All we know is she just didn't go home at those times. And in fact, the time that Alan Jackson said there was a gap was between 12:37 and 12:39. But we now know that Karen was at home. She drove into that driveway because her phone connected to John's Wi-Fi automatic connection at 12:36 and 38 seconds, which fits the timelines perfectly, by the way. Maybe we'll get to that later. But there was no gap. The point is all these things they were continuously trying to turn up as odd things. Almost all of them had really mundane explanations. Turtle never gives you the mundane explanation because he's not interested in telling you the truth. He never has been. The truth is not his game. His game is to make money and pick up subscribers and be popular. He won't tell you the truth. He never told you about the GPS when it came out. And I predicted on my show, that came out in September of 2023. I did a show on it in the morning, and I predicted Turtle Boy is not going to mention it on the air. I also predicted he wasn't going to mention the microscopic taillight fragments found inside John's clothing. And sure enough, he went through his whole show and didn't talk about these things until he takes questions at the end of the show. And some people said, Kevin Lenihan from Yellow Cottage Tales said you won't talk about these things. And now he had to address them. But he said, obviously, as far as the microscopic taillight pieces, he just said, well, Trooper Proctor sprinkled them on the clothing, of course. And the GPS, he said, I haven't looked at it yet. So all I know is Kevin Lenihan lies. I never lied about anything. In late August, or just a couple weeks before that, Turtle Boy showed up on my show in chat, and he accused me of both sidesism. I try to look at things objectively. That's both sidesism. He doesn't like that. And I got mad at that. So they call it the Meltdown Show. But I accused him of working directly with the defense and their lawyers. You lie, he said. You lie. But no, the phone records would later show that Karen was in almost daily communications, multiple times a day communications with Karen, and he had over a dozen calls with Jackson and over a dozen calls with Yenny back at the early days. That's before they all switched over an encryption app, Signal. Who knows how many communications after that. So Turtle Boy lied about that. He doesn't want to tell his audience the truth. I tell my audience the truth. If something came out tomorrow that exonerated Karen, I would tell it to you tomorrow. I would. And people that watch this show sense that, and they know that. Well, I think that normal people that watch Turtle Boy's show would sense, nah, that guy's not about truth. That guy's not about truth. All right. So the timeline, just to finish up on that. Karen's Lexus was either under surveillance all day or she was in it at all times. There's no other times besides that. And then when it arrives at the Sally Port, there is no time to tamper with a piece there and go and bury it 3 feet down in the snow. There's no time. So that timeline is pretty much bulletproof. It's not the only bulletproof thing in this case. So the timeline on that, it really shows, yeah, she did it. I don't know if that was made clear enough to you at the trial. I'm sorry if it wasn't. But it's clear now. And you can look at it and see a hero. To be a hero, you have to make a sacrifice. You have to do something that in some way harms your own interest. That's what heroes do. A heroic person risks his life to save somebody else's life, right? Right? Well, it's the same thing here. If you're a juror and you've been out speaking about this case, to go out and say, you know what, I've taken a closer look at this and I was wrong, that's hard to do. But you're a hero because you'd be saving innocent people who are continuing to be falsely accused of crimes. Look at, this has been going on in the media. Karen's still doing it. Jackson still doing it. Yannetti still doing it. They know who did the crime. They know who did the crime. They've seen the evidence, but they want to fool you. But you can be a hero. You can be a hero and look at the truth here. All I'm asking you to do is take your time and look at this truth. I'll talk to you privately. I'm doing it right here in the show. Use your own brain. You figure it out. And then have the courage to go somewhere in public and say we had it wrong. You can do that. All right, now let's look at the GPS of John's phone. So when they do the extraction of John's phone, they get the GPS, and that's giving you location data of how his phone travels, and there's a certain margin of error on it. Now, we learned in this last trial from Ian Whiffen that once the Waze app is indicated, that the accuracy of that GPS becomes much more accurate, because now the Waze app is using the phone to access other sources to synchronize that information, like cellular signals, for example. So it's about a mile from 34 Fairview when John O'Keefe calls Jen McCabe for the address because they hadn't been there before, and they couldn't figure out how to find it. So when they do that, she gives him the address and he punches it into Waze, and now the GPS becomes very accurate, and it takes them up. They had just missed the turn from Dedham onto Cedar Crest, so it takes them through the neighborhood to bring them back to Cedar Crest, and they take the right-hand turn onto Cedar Crest. Now they have to go by a couple of streets, and then the next thing will be to take a left-hand turn onto Fairview. But they missed the turn, maybe because they were arguing, maybe because it was too dark. In any case, they missed the turn. But that very accurate Waze GPS data tells us exactly what time they missed that turn. And it was at 12:33 and 36 seconds. So that necessitates a 3-point turn. So Karen does a 3-point turn. Now that turn is picked up in the data. And now they take a right when they come back to the intersection. Now the truck with Nagel in it is driven by Ricky D'Antonio. That's coming from the other direction. But now Karen has the right of way, so they go. And that turn is also picked up very accurately in the data. And it was at 12:24 and 18 seconds. Now, as we follow that data, Karen never stops the car in front of the driveway. She never does. She slows down, and then she slowly rolls to the end of the street to where the flagpole is. And that's the very last GPS location of John's phone ever, until it's moved the next morning. Now, there's a 15-foot margin of error on the GPS location data. So depending on what the signal strength coming in is. So obviously at some point, John got out of the vehicle and didn't travel more than 15 feet. And that's why it's in the same location. So Karen's story, if you go back and watch all her many clips in the media, has always evolved and changed. But one thing that she always said was she dropped John off. And then later on, she said, I saw him walk to the door. Then later on, she said, I saw him poke his head in the door. And then finally, she reached the point where I saw him walk into the door. Well, that's all inconsistent with her statements because it doesn't match up with the GPS. The GPS shows that if John got out of that car, he jumped out of a moving vehicle, and Karen's never testified that. All right? Then the vehicle reaches the end of the street where the flagpole area is, and that's where she stops. And she sits there, presumably arguing with John for multiple minutes. Now, we know from John's, again, from his phone, and from this was data that came out in the second trial from Ian Whiffen that did this work. Your phone, for safety reasons, accurately records temperature of the battery. Doesn't want it to get too hot, it could blow up, right? So the temperature of that phone inside the car was 75 degrees. It was probably in John's hand, and the car heated up. Now, the exact moment when he gets out of the car is detected because the battery temperature suddenly drops to 70 degrees. And that's more or less where it stayed, right? And I know that's given people on the jury some trouble because it seems like it should have dropped a lot more because it was like 18 degrees outside. But it's in his hand, and it's only about 9 or 10 seconds later that she strikes him, and he ends up on the lawn with the phone underneath him. Now, John's body temperature will slowly drop during the course of the night, as is normal with an unconscious or a dead body. Slowly drop. And when John's found the next morning by the first responders, his body is 80 degrees. It's like 80.1 degrees or something like that. So the phone underneath his body had reached 75 and more or less stayed there because it's protected by John's body and his body temperature. Even if he was dead, it still it takes a long time for that body temperature to decrease. So we know that John got out of the car at 12:30. Wait a second. At 12:31 and 59 seconds. We know that from the battery temperature drop. And his phone moved for the very last time at 12:32 and 16 seconds. It didn't move until Kerry Roberts picked it up after the first responders put John on the stretcher the next morning, and Kerry Roberts picked it up. And that is all. The temperature drop is documented there too. And then the GPS and the health app data charts the movement of the phone. All right. So the phone last stops moving at 12:32 and 16 seconds. So at that time, John is lying on top of it unconscious. John got out of the car, we know from the temperature drop, at 12:31 and 59 seconds. So that's only 17 seconds before. So 17 seconds after John got out of the car, his phone stopped moving and was underneath his body. What else do we have? Well, John, when he got out of the car, checked his messages because Jen had been messaging like, where are you, or something like that. And then he hit the button that turns your screen off. And that was at, I believe, 12:32:08 or 09, I forget. So it's a couple of seconds after that John gets struck by Karen. 2, 3, 4 seconds. And that's it. And there's no way to get around any of this data. Meanwhile, back to the correlation. The key thing is that vehicle data is very important because The tech stream vehicle data picked up the first event was the 3-point turn. Now, the vehicle data, you have to do a little work to get the times. And I think it was actually Burgess that nailed down the exact time of the 3-point turn. But I had nailed it down to within a few seconds a year ago. And I put that chart out. I sent that chart to the prosecution. They obviously did not use it or send it to Dr. Welcher, or it would have saved them a lot of problems. But that you put, if that, what I used then was to put the 3-point turn in the middle between the missed left-hand turn and the eventual right-hand turn that they took on to Fairview. And putting that exactly in the middle was 12:32:02. I'm sorry, 12:24:02. And that's exactly the same time that Burgess was able to determine with much more accuracy. So I had it right a year ago, and they got it right now, and you can have it right now too. Now, after that 3-point turn, which was triggered because Karen was going in at an unusually high speed in reverse, that's what caused the algorithm to say something weird is going on here. Let's create an event. An event that's triggered will get the 5 seconds before and the 5 seconds after the triggering moment. So there's not a time clock inside the tech stream data, but there is a countdown clock, a stopwatch kind of clock. So we know that the second event, when Karen puts it in reverse, takes place 8 minutes and 2 seconds. I'm going on memory here. No, or is it 6 seconds? I forget. After, I think it's 8 minutes and 6 seconds. I should have the date in front of me, but I don't. But I can grab it real quickly if we really need it. But 8 minutes and 4 seconds or 6 seconds, I forget. It's in that range after the first one. And so that's when she puts it into reverse on Fairview. Well, she puts it in drive, goes forward a few seconds, and then puts it in reverse, which creates the trigger. And she goes backwards up to 24 miles an hour. And that's when John is struck, somewhere at that time. This is bulletproof data. You can't get around it. There's no innocent explanation for it. So, not saying she's guilty. I'm saying there's no innocent explanation for these things. Now, another thing that was a big thing to talk about was the condition of the taillight. Now, you probably didn't know, but in the first trial, during closing arguments, Alan Jackson made a point of showing the jury what the same picture he showed you guys from the driveway. But here, he told the jury that taillight is undamaged, cracked at most. Told it it's undamaged. He told you guys a different story. He told you guys, yeah, sure, it's damaged and sure, it's missing pieces, but it's not the same kind of pieces that were missing. It's the pieces that are missing are smaller compared to what it was found missing later. He told you guys a very different story that he told the first jury. It's not your fault. You couldn't know that. So that's the reality of it. He's going to tell a different story, whatever it takes to fit. Right? So what do we know about the taillight? So at 5:08, when Karen pulls out, you got the video there. I think if you look at it close enough, it's pretty clear that what you can see is missing and more or less in the same pattern of what you'll see later on at the Sally Port. But then in addition, at roughly 5:30, Karen shows her taillight, her broken taillight, to Kerry Roberts and to Jen McCabe in the driveway of John's house. Now, both those women testified to that, but in addition, Karen herself, with her lawyers present, told Boston Magazine reporter Gretchen Voss the same thing, that my taillight was really damaged. I was worried she described it very vividly. You got to hear that in court. She said, I was worried it might hurt someone that was walking by. And she reaches in and she herself pulls out a piece of taillight and drops it in the driveway. Now, why did she tell this story? Why did the lawyers let her tell this story? Well, they didn't understand back then how important it was for them to try to say that the taillight was merely missing pieces, was not missing pieces, that it was merely cracked. They didn't know that then. In fact, they didn't know it until I said that to Sean McDonough, and he must have told them that. And then they started putting it together. But for some reason, they didn't put it together till I put it together. Pat myself in the back. Hey, I can do it, right? For some reason, they hadn't thought it through. So she tells Gretchen Voss, so why did she tell that story? Because she wanted to try to say that the state police were lying because days after John's death, when the snow was melting, state police searched John's driveway and didn't find any taillight pieces. But in that first trial, Adam Lally, wondering if the defense was going to go that route, made a point of showing how the driveway was shoveled and then snowblown. So that missing piece, if Karen did drop one there, is probably still, it ended up on Dedham Street, or it ended up in the neighbor's yard, wherever a snowblower would throw it, wherever the snowblower was throwing it. That's where it ended up. But Karen herself has admitted to pulling out that piece. All right. Then you get the dash cam video from the Canton car that went to do a wellness check at 8:22. And again, you can see very clearly in that one that not only is the taillight missing a piece, but it's exactly what you're seeing in the Sally Port later. In fact, I did a show on this already. Go back to Officer Barrows. Now, Barrows did say, under direct examination by the defense, he said, no way. What did he say? He said, absolutely not. Was what you saw in the driveway the same as what you see here? And they showed him a picture of the taillight in the Sally Port, and he said, absolutely not. And he was adamant. And again, people like to have their 15 minutes of fame, right? He had driven all the way out to Karen's war station at the Omni Hotel in the Seaport to meet with them. He wanted his 15 minutes of fame. He wanted to be a hero. All right. And he said, absolutely not. But then Hank showed him the pictures of the taillight, especially the one of the taillight from the dash cam video. And if you look closely at that, and Barrows did, and Hank said, is that consistent with what you see in the image of the Sally Port? And is that consistent with what you saw yourself later on in Karen's driveway? And he said, yes, it was. He said it quietly because he wasn't happy to say it. So people in the public missed it. I hope the jurors didn't miss it. But what he basically said was, yeah, that's what I saw. So he basically, that's his way of, he retracted his earlier statement saying that it was absolutely not. He walked it back. And that's not something that people want to hear, but on that side, but it's just the truth. And you can look it up yourself. You can go back and watch that testimony if you like. Because again, I'm talking to the jurors here. You're the ones that have a chance to, only you and only you can really step up and be heroes here. I can't. I've done my part. I've covered this for 2 years. I started out thinking that maybe there was a conspiracy, maybe there was a cover-up. And then as more evidence came out and I kept thinking it through, I knew it didn't make sense. Why would somebody attack somebody inside their own house? Well, so think about this. You're inviting your daughter, who no longer lives there. She's 26. She doesn't live at home. You're inviting her back to an after-hours party house. You're planning a hit inside your own house where you've got your wife, where you're bringing your daughter back, and you've got your son who lives at home and who has some guests from his own birthday party, and he has some anxiety issues. You're going to invite this guy back to basically attack him in front of your own family? That's crazy. And then you're going to take him and you're going to drag him out and leave him in your own lawn alive? Because that's what the theory was. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense at all. But that's what they were saying. I mean, you could just why not try, if you know you're going to try to frame Karen, why not put him on the street? Why not put him in the neighbor's yard? But they don't do that. Doesn't really make sense, does it? So I started asking questions like that. And then eventually more evidence came out about the taillight and really about the time of where. Thank you, Claire Marie. I do very much appreciate it, Claire Marie, because that's one of the things we're going to have to do here is people can help too by joining up for the membership. So that after the trial, the memberships really drop off, and StreamYard has gone up with their expense, and I have a few other expenses. So I'll make the decision over the next few weeks if the incoming money is enough to pay for the expenses of the channel. And if it isn't, I will have to do something. So Not sure what yet. So anyways, I was asking questions like that, but what really cinched it for me was when I got the timeline of where the Lexus was and where Karen was all day. And we now know that even better because of evidence that came out during the trials. But I had enough of it back in September of 2023 to realize, yeah, there's no conspiracy here. There's no cover up. It doesn't make sense. So you can figure that out too. You really can figure that out too. And I'm helping. I'm here to help. But if somebody's going to be a hero here, it's got to be you, because you've got to come out and you've made yourself into minor celebrities, some of you. And now you got a chance to come out and say, you know what? I got that wrong. That's going to hurt. It's going to hurt to do that. But that's what being a hero is. Being a hero is doing something that harms yourself, that hurts yourself. That's what you got to do. And if you do something like that, I will call you a hero. That may not mean much to you, but other people will too. You're going to have to take a lot of heat. Any mob is going to be pro-conspiracy. Conspiracies are juicy. So they're going to be mad at you. So that's the heat you would have to take. Let's see what else we got. Now, we can debunk some of the odd things that were presented to you. All right. How about the Canton cops not finding taillight pieces themselves when they searched? This is so easy to debunk that it bothers me that I still keep hearing people say this. And I talked to Turtle Boy on the phone about this a couple of years ago, and he said this was the biggest reason he believed there was a conspiracy. But it's crazy. So when you know the facts. So the Canton police, they knew that in Massachusetts, the investigation was automatically going to be taken over by the troopers, and they were going to lead it. But they had been informed that the troopers were not coming that morning because of the blizzard. So they could see that where John had been found was piling up with snow, and I think they could see a little bit of the blood there. So they decided they had to take some action to preserve evidence that was going to be covered by the snow, particularly the blood evidence that would be lost forever. So they took out a leaf blower, and it was very effective when combined with having Officer Goody film it. I forget if it was Goody or Lank that did the filming. And so those two things combined not only to tell us where the blood was, but what level it was. Now that was just John's blood, as it turned out, but they didn't know that at the time. So they did that, and they picked up the remnants of the broken cocktail glass. That's it. They never searched the street. Never. And that's where the taillight pieces were found, on the street. So why didn't the Canton police find any taillight pieces? Because they didn't search the street. Why did the state police find it? Because they searched the street. That's simple. It's that simple. What about the Canton cops not investigating the house? Well, first you should know that there were two Canton cops, Sergeant Lang and Officer Good, who did go in the house. But it's true, they didn't search it. They would have needed either a search warrant for that or permission from the owners. But let's respect Sergeant Lank's judgment. So Jen McCabe goes into the house and has to go up to the second floor to wake up her sister and her brother-in-law. And she goes back down. Now, by the time she comes down, the cops were already inside the house. So it seems that the cops got there and the storm door was closed, but the inside door was open, so they decided to go in. And they were waiting at the bottom of the stairs when Brian and Nicole came down. Now, Lank testified that he could tell that they looked like they had just woke up. In particular, Brian looked like he just woken up. Now, remember, Brian had a long day traveling to New York the day before for a police officer's funeral, then a long drive back, and then a night of drinking. So probably not surprising that he looked tired when he came down. So if you're looking at this from Officer Lank's position, nobody stopped you from going into the house. The door was open, and nothing looks amiss. And the homeowners look like they just woke up. So was it really likely in those circumstances that he was going to ask the homeowners to search the house? Probably not. And getting a warrant would have been very difficult. So it's not really surprising that he didn't do that. What about the troopers? They didn't investigate the house. Well, Proctor and Buchanan never went to the house that day. That's proven by their phone data. The CERT team was there just to search the scene, and by the time of evening when that search was going on, they had enough evidence to know this was very likely a hit and run. And all the classic signs of it. John was missing a shoe. And that was the main thing. So the troopers learned about the missing shoe when they went to the hospital. But also the witnesses from inside the house had all said that John never went inside the house. So, but by that time, the troopers had interviewed Brian and Jen McCabe. And probably Matt McCabe too. And they all testified that John never went in the house. So it started to look like just a simple, ordinary hit and run. Now, what about Officer Devers? Now, what I had heard before the first trial, when she was on the defense list, again, but they didn't call on her that time, was that she was a Canton cop that was a little disgruntled there. And I don't know, maybe she wasn't well liked or whatever. Whatever information she had, and I heard that she had seen, at one point claimed to had seen Brian Higgins with now dead chief of police. I can't remember his name at the moment. So would have been the chief of police right before the current chief of police. It'll come to me. It'll come back to me. Sorry, my brain doesn't work so well anymore. Some of these drugs have a tendency to, well, chemotherapy can cause some memory loss. So anyways, I can't think of his name. But she supposedly had saw the chief with Higgins for a weirdly long time. We now know, she said, and she reached out to the FBI, it seems. But we knew from the first, what my information had from the first trial, that she was a hostile witness. She did not want to testify for the defense. And I also heard that she had been seen going in to prepare with Lally. So the defense chose not to call on her in the first trial. But in the second trial, they did, and they made good use of it. And she was hostile, but she had to admit what she told the FBI. And then she had to admit that she had to go and contact the FBI to retract it, because she learned somehow that she could not have seen what she claimed to have seen because she wasn't in the station. So it's either because she left work that day, she took on another shift to help out, and then left at 3:45, or it's also possible that later on, when she remembered this stuff, she was thinking of a different day, so who knows? But she had to retract that. And what about Dr. Lollapalooza? Well, it turns out the doctor has a bad history with Hank Brennan. It turns out she has a reputation to be the gun for hire in these cases. But she was an effective testifier, and she would have probably had a good impact on the jury. But that's just the nature of these cases, is you're always going to get, especially if you have a highly paid defense team, and in a high profile case, you're going to get a certain amount of experts that come out of the woodwork that aren't really reliable. Dr. Wolf from ARCA. What they didn't tell you guys is that this began when Karen and her team, I'm in a little bit of pain. I have to stand up a little bit. Let's just take a break for a second. I fought the pain off as long as I could. So in August of 2022, Karen and her team managed to get a meeting with then first assistant U.S. attorney Josh Levy, who would become U.S. attorney. Now, Josh Levy, that's basically second in command underneath the U.S. attorney. Very powerful position. Karen was very excited about this. Now, how did they get that meeting? Whose connection? Probably Yanetti's, but we don't know. But they convinced Levy that there was something here. And he probably got excited thinking, here's an opportunity for me. He's an ambitious guy. This can be my big story here, right? If I help prosecute this. And so he tasks the FBI to start investigating it. And by November, he's sending out subpoenas and as part of starting the federal grand jury process. So he subpoenas the phone records of everybody that Karen's defense team accused of being part of the conspiracy. That's very odd, right? Now, those records were just to get who called who and stuff like that. It doesn't get the content. They would later get that. So then the federal grand jury began in like April. And it seems that someone from the U.S. Attorney's Office was feeding the information of who would be testifying when and where to Karen, who was feeding it to Turtle Boy, who was using it to stir up that mob that hounded those witnesses. All right. A whole bunch of lying going on, too. If you look at Turtle Boy pretending to have a source. No, his source was Karen all along. He's a liar. What can you do? So eventually the feds hired this independent accident reconstruction company, but it's a company that does a ton. Most of the business they do is with the military, which is part of the federal government. And so they primarily it's Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler that are assigned to work this case. So the last witness to testify for the federal grand jury was Michael Proctor, and I think it was around February 1st, so just before the trial. The U.S. Attorney's Office, the Judge Canoni knew about this stuff, and in every hearing was inviting the U.S. Attorney to send someone in to explain what was going on, and they utterly refused. The federal government is extremely arrogant. They would never reply, never send anybody in. You can see the judge was exasperated, but she couldn't do anything. By May or April, the feds were basically done. They had nothing else to look into. They hadn't found anything. But they still had these strange communications going on with Dr. Wolf of Arca. So they were cleared to testify for the defense. But while she was while she was testifying, while Dr. Wolf was they were cleared to testify for Karen. By the time they were called on, they knew they would be later because the defense would be calling them up. The U.S. Attorney's Office, we learned this April from Dr. Wolf in court. The U.S. Attorney's Office was breaking sequestration order. So none of these experts were allowed to talk to anybody else about who had testified before them. But the U.S. Attorney's Office was communicating to Dr. Wolf. He knew it was wrong, and they knew it was wrong, but they did it anyways. What the state's experts were saying was their theory of the accident. And obviously, Dr. Wolf was feeding it to Dr. Rentschler. So Dr. Wolf, I know you guys liked him, is a scumbag. He knew. Now, once Dr. Wolf was brought on to take the side, somehow the U.S. Attorney's Office had communicated to them subtly, no doubt, when they first hired him, that what they wanted to do was help Karen. They wanted to prove that this accident could not have been done by a vehicle. And they were continuing to help them through the trial, breaking that sequestration order. And we would later learn also that there were over 100 messages between Dr. Wolf and the U.S. Attorney's Office were deleted. In addition, we learned that this is amazing. The defense team began communicating with Dr. Wolf through an encryption app called Signal. So I apologize. The messages that were deleted by Dr. Wolf was between him and the defense, between him and Alan Jackson. That's what it was, not between him and the feds. I told you the memory is a little off. So illegally deleted all those messages. And then what does an encryption app do? Well, it automatically deletes the message after 20 minutes, something like that, whatever you set it to. So if any communications between Dr. Wolf and Alan Jackson would automatically be deleted after 20 minutes, automatically. That's shady. I've never heard of any other expert witness using an encryption app. was the first time Dr. Wolf ever used it with him, and he's testify. All he does is testify. That's the big part of his business. But yet Alan Jackson was doing that. Now, coincidentally, Alan Jackson was also, that was what he was using to Karen. He got Karen to use that too. So Karen was using Signal to communicate with anybody during that summer, figuring it was safe, knowing she was up to something shady, just like Alan Jackson knew they were up to something shady. And now you know that they were up to something shady, and those messages were deleted. And whatever they did on that encryption app, however many hundreds or thousands of messages they were automatically deleted. This is a lot of shady stuff that was going on. A lot of shady stuff. And he might go on shows now, and you're not going to hear somebody like Sue O'Connell ever ask him about that. No, because she's on their side. So it's different. Unfortunately, we're not getting anybody in the media to ask about that stuff. It's just not what they want. They want ratings. And especially now that the jury has spoke, those ratings are all on one side. But they'd always been on that one side too, because everybody loves a good, juicy conspiracy theory, right? All right, let's go back to one other thing on that. I forget her name, but the Greek Karina something, the Greek woman who testified. Now her testimony was strange, right? Didn't you find it strange? She comes out and she says that she saw, and it was so clear it had been rehearsed beforehand through David, his questioning, that she saw John come up and kiss Karen on the forehead or the top of the head, and that was the sweetest thing she ever saw in her life. The sweetest thing. Now, I've seen a million boyfriends do that. I've done that a million times. You kiss your girlfriend on the top of the head. This woman never saw that before? And she thought that was the sweetest thing in her life? Come on. This is a woman that for some reason is friends with Karen. We know she's friends with Karen. And she's willing to, fudge herself on the stand in order to help Karen. Because it's this big high-profile case. And then she said, now Jen had been some kind of friend, or, their kids had been on school teams together. So if they'd known each other for 8 years, at least. And now she plays into the defense theory that they'd made clear in the first trial that it was for some reason unusual that Jen McCabe put her arm around Karen and said, oh, why don't you drive with us? This is what goes on outside a bar at last call when people are getting to go to after hours parties. You didn't know that, Karina? Come on. There was nothing suspicious about that. But you don't want to say that, do you? Because you're trying to help Karen. It's not ethical. You're not after the truth. You're willing to destroy someone who's done nothing wrong, who was a friend, or at least an acquaintance to you, just to help Karen? It's disgusting. So we're almost reached the end of this show. So let me just, and my back is still hurting. So let me, let's go to questions. And heart, sass, and all that jazz. Thank you very much for the super sticker. And they're all, whatever size someone wants to give, they all mean a lot to me, and I appreciate it. And it does help me keep the channel going. So thank you very much. And again, thank you, Claire Marie Stewart. And let's go to the live questions. I'll take on as long as my back allows me to. Yeah, the pharmacist, exactly. Am I worried about the jury pool for the civil case? Yeah, I'm worried about jury pools for every case from now on. There seems to be something fundamentally flawed with the jury pool selection process that we have here. I think we as a country are getting stupider and stupider. We're not capable, at least here in Massachusetts, but I think in the country, are not capable of critical thinking anymore. Or most of us are not, and it's becoming a problem. And but in these high-profile cases that need to want to be in that 15 minutes of fame, it draws a certain type of juror on too, right? So all these things are issues. Acceptable risk, thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. And I've seen some of your good questions here and comments. DJ says, when you have to lie, cheat, commit fraud upon the court, break sequestration, orders in order to fix testimony, poison the jury pool to win. It doesn't scream innocent, doesn't. No, and nothing she has done screams innocent. But again, I'm not blaming the jury. There were mistakes made by the prosecution, both at the strategic level and just other mistakes that occurred during the trial. That's just another problem was Dr. Welcher. They paid this company $700,000, and they really did a very inadequate job, if you ask me. I have not been in touch with Brian Higgins for months, so I don't know if he still follows the show, but I have not heard from him in months. Our communications were always, he would reach out to me through anonymous phone call. So when I would see the call that would say anonymous, I would know it was Brian, but I had no way to contact him. Well, unless I went through his lawyer, but I'm not going to bother. Things like that. Voice of Reason. I'll click this on here. It says, Kevin, I'm afraid the blogger is going to get away with this harassment. What do you think? Yeah, I don't know, but it's worrying, right? I mean, he's put his harassment, he's videoed it, and he puts it on his show. But are you going to get honest jurors on there? I don't know. And I think it seems like a pretty good chance that there would be another hung jury. Is Ken says, is Alan Jackson ever going to pay a price for his lies? At the end of the day, I have to agree with some people like Matt on the channel that really didn't think that the judge did a good job, and I think there were parts of it she didn't, including jury selection. Thank you, Acceptable Risk. Good night. Robert P says, no one knows this better than Kevin. Well, I would say Kate too. And I pray this. There were some things that I knew that she didn't know, and there are things that she didn't know that I didn't do. So together, we were a very formidable team on the panel, or anytime we've covered the show. And Robert says, I pray this fraud somehow will come uncovered at some point. It's worrying though, right? Because it's going to happen to other cases too, especially high profile cases. It's very worrying. If you can't, it's very hard. If a vast part of the public is incapable of critical thought, that's what a jury pool comes from. So, Tom is having double fudge ice cream. I still have a little bit left of chocolate cookie ice cream in the fridge, so I'm going to have that. But unfortunately, it's not much left. Maui, thank you very much. Why the silence from everyone, Kevin? By everyone, you mean the witnesses, right? So it's complicated, and a lot of it's understandable, and some of it's choice. So when some of them had signed a deal with Netflix, and Netflix has to let them out of it, some of them are worried about their own lawyers advising them to be quiet because of the pending witness intimidation cases or other reasons. And I think in some cases, a lot of them just wanted to hope it would go away so they could have a normal life again and their kids could have a normal life. And I understand that. I do understand that. I don't know. I'm more of a fighter. I'd be out there fighting, but it's their choice. I still think there's a way to capture that. You're never going to get it's not about thinking about numbers. They always are going to have the numbers so they're always going to have more podcasters. They're always going to have podcasters with a larger audience. But there is something that we have on this side. Truth. Facts. So that's a pretty big advantage. Logic. It's a very big advantage. Trying to catch up on the comments, but everybody's still here with us. Thank you. You notice, obviously, the audiences are much smaller, and we expected that. As long as the audience stays at around this level, I'll keep doing shows. If it drops too low, it's not worth it, right? So I have other things I'm working on, and it does cause me a little pain to sit here. All right. Bones are on the inside. Said thoughts on jury saying at the end of the day they did not have evidence of the car hitting John. Like to say they determined if a tree fall in the woods. Well, I could see where they said that because there were experts that were very well spoken. They're used to testifying that got up and said John was not struck by a vehicle. So that was certain. Even if they didn't have the most convincing argument, it certainly might be enough to create reasonable doubt, right? So that part, I understand. But you have to get them to look at the other fundamental evidence. You have to look at the totality of the evidence. That's the key. So look at the arguments that I made up earlier about the time that I showed up earlier about the timelines. Those are important. I don't know that case, Maui, Kentucky versus Hawk. Let me bring on something for you. This is a new project that I've been talking to you for a while about. Okay, so this is the cold case desk, and this is going to be done in partnership with a lot of the channels that you know, Margaret's channel, Jen's channel, and we'll see who else. So we want to bring attention to cold cases for the sake of the families. And you guys can continue to tell us which cases you like. This is the website that's under construction. And you can see it's still under construction. It's got a little ways to go. And for those communities, those unsolved crimes do still hold the community. So we got to get a bigger title up here. There's a tip line up here, and not sure where the web designer has. See, I'd given him a bunch of cases. I don't see them. I gave him a bunch of articles about cases. Let's see if I can't find them listed. So we got a lot of work to do on this on the website still. So we'll get there. We will get there. So I'm back to looking at the chat. I'm laughing at Tom. I'm not planning on dying soon. My doctor I was with my doctor yesterday, had chemotherapy yesterday. I went with my doctor beforehand. There's plenty of new treatments coming out or on the verge of coming out that should give us things to the paddleboarder in Maine just recently murdered. Yep, that's Margaret made me aware of that today. So actually me and Margaret are going to go up and visit the crime site and try to get some video, maybe talk to you guys, do a live show up there about it. But at the very least get some video for you. And we'll see what is broken down. Who knows? Maybe they'll have an arrest by then, right? But it sounds like there's some thoughts this could be a serial killer. Thank you, Red Sky. Website needs some work, but we'll get there. Margaret has to do all the driving. She says she likes driving. I'm not allowed to drive because I'm on very heavy levels of morphine. So I'm not allowed to drive. I don't know if Court T will ever be having back on. This was a rare kind of special case, and I'm not a lawyer. They prefer to have lawyers on. So I'm not sure why you say Kate Peters is your only hope. I think I've done a lot of good work on this case myself, but that's okay. I thank God for Kate Peters too. So I try to tell people that, she would self-describe herself as a sociopath, but it's not at all. When you meet the real Kate Peters and you work with the real Kate Peters, it's not like she's actually not like what even she thinks, right? She's actually a good person. So, for instance, I had someone that reached out to me a while back that was a long time moderator for Turtle Boy's channel, someone that was close to him. And she had decided that Karen had used him and that she was fearful for him being destroyed by Karen. And so she reached out to me, and she was willing to come on the show. She wanted to come on the show. And I advised her against it. I talked to her on the phone for an hour one Sunday while I was watching the Patriots, Easy to Do last season. And she was emotional. And I said, I don't think it's in your best interest to come on my show and talk about Turtle Boy. And she appreciated that. And she didn't. But I know Kate has done similar things with other people that have come forward to her. And many times, obviously Kate would love to stick it to Turtle somewhere, but if she feels it's not in the best interest of that person to go on her show, she'll advise, don't go on her show. And I've seen it happen. So she does have a heart, and she does have a sense of trying to do the right thing. And this is something that you don't get to see unless you work with her and get to know her privately. But if you do, then you get to see it pretty quickly. So thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. No, Kate doesn't do it for the money, but Kate could use money. She's not wealthy. So if she does shows, please never feel guilty about sending a donation to her, because she could use the money. All she gets is free couches. Jay says he was juror 4. Well, prove it, Jay. Prove it, brother. Anybody can come on and make claims. You know my email. If you want to reach out to me, you can prove it. Leitskev, Leitskev, @gmail.com. Cheryl J., thank you very much. And Cheryl says, thank you for coming on. I value your opinion with everything that has happened since the trial. Not many people are brave enough to stand up to the mob. It's never been a problem standing up to the mob. I don't find it takes a particular amount of bravery for me, but for me, it's health issues. Still not fully recovered my strength and going through some treatments to drive it back down again. I was in the hospital for a week during the trial. And I have emails from Jason prior to the trial. I answer all emails. Did I answer your email? So unless the email went to spam, I answer all. There's no emails I don't answer. So did I answer your emails, Jay? Just looking to see if Jay is going to answer. Oh, I did. Okay. All right. Good. So at least I answered. I don't remember, but you never told me you've never emailed to tell me you were a juror. Right? There was one person that reached out. They were kind of sheepish about it, that said they were a juror, but they gave me no information. And then they disappeared. So I don't know. Right. So I would always email anybody back. Now, sometimes once I begin this email exchange with people, and then they start sending me 3 or 4 a day, I do stop emailing them, because I just don't have time to do that. It becomes too much of a time drain. But certainly anybody that's emailed me the first time, I do email them back. So Jay, I don't know. We're still waiting for you. Probably a catfish, yes. More than likely. But Joe has much more experience moderator Joe has much more experience in monitoring Jay. So you got to prove it to us, Jay. You made a big claim. Now you got to prove it. Okay, guys. So that's about as much as I can take. I'm going to go warm up so I can have my ice cream. But thank you very much for being here. We'll see how it goes, but this is probably, unless something else develops, will probably be the last time we go over Karen Read. Nothing new is coming out. So unless the witnesses decide to come forward, some of the witnesses want to come forward, then I'm more than willing to keep working on this. But at some point, it's just a waste of time. And I've always preferred working on the puzzle of cold cases. So we can do that. Thank you, Don. I appreciate the attitude. I do appreciate the attitude. That's the right attitude. Hi, Lisa. So let's call it a night. And the Red Sox won 9 in a row today. Beautiful, beautiful 1-0 victory. Yesterday was a come from behind victory, 2-1 shot by Rafaela in the last inning. It was excellent. Yeah. So Red, you're always welcome to join us once we get the website fully up. I gotta get on that tomorrow. Get that going. Okay, guys. Have a good night.